All right, let's dive into one of history's most fascinating and, frankly, mysterious legends. We're talking about the story of King Solomon and the 72 powerful spirits he supposedly commanded. It's a tale that feels like it was written in whispers, somewhere between dust and flame. You see, before Solomon, the legends say the world was just filled with these forces ancient, chaotic, incredibly powerful spirits, beings born of smokeless fire that just roamed the deserts of Babylon, waiting for a command that could finally tame their rebellion. So, the big question is, how did one man possibly confront this entire unseen world? And you have to understand, this wasn't some quest for personal power. This was a divine mission, a task to bring order to the hidden chaos, given to a king who was chosen not by his own ambition, but by a higher decree. Solomon's authority, his power, it came directly from a divine source. And this was symbolized by a legendary ring, a seal engraved with the very name of God, a mark that no darkness, no entity could possibly defy. He wasn't meant to be a tyrant, he was meant to be a judge, bringing celestial law into the abyss itself. And get this, the legend describes a process that's incredibly methodical. One by one, each of the 72 spirits was summoned by the power of that ring. Then they were bound by sacred names, names known only to prophets and angels. After that, they were sealed inside a massive brass vessel, basically a prison for chaos, which was then cast into a deep lake. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. These forces of chaos, they weren't just some random, disorganized mob. The legend organizes them into this intricate hierarchy, a kind of infernal court, which suggests a pretty wild idea that order isn't just born from light. Even the shadows have their kings. Okay, so to make sense of all 72 of these spirits, we can kind of group them into archetypes. First, you've got your rulers, who command through raw power and fear. Then you have the whisperers. Think of them as the courtiers of corruption, using seduction and influence. And finally, you have the scholars, who offer up forbidden knowledge and secret revelations. This structure gives every rank a specific job, you know? The kings, they're the sovereigns of rebellion. The dukes, they don't use brute force, they use perfume and promises. The princes are the keepers of secrets. The marquises act as generals on unseen battlefields. And the earls? They're the cold, calculating accountants of the abyss, just keeping the ledgers of damnation. Now, a legend this powerful, it's going to inspire people. For centuries, magicians and occultists believed they could actually replicate Solomon's amazing feat. But to do that, they needed a very specific set of tools, a kind of spiritual technology, if you will. Their main tool was something called a grimoire, which is essentially a textbook of magic. And the most famous one for this legend, by far, is the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as the Goetia. And it's not just a book of stories, it's an instruction manual mapping this entire invisible empire with incredible detail. So you crack open one of these grimoires, and you'll find the whole toolkit. The magic circle? That's not just decoration, it's a fortress to protect you. The triangle outside of it, that's the manifestation zone, a cage for the spirit. Each of the 72 has its own unique sigil. Think of it like a personal phone number. And the divine names, that's the source code of command, the ultimate authority. So all this time, we've been looking at this super elaborate system for caging monsters. But it makes you wonder, right? What if that cage was also a mirror? And that thought brings us to a much more modern, more psychological way of looking at all this. What if these 72 spirits aren't really monsters from some fiery abyss, but are actually powerful metaphors for the conflicts that rage inside every single one of us? Just think about the connection for a second. Take a spirit like Asmodeus, the lord of desire and vengeance. Is he an external entity, or is he simply the name we give to that awful moment when our own passion curdles and turns into destructive rage? When you look at it this way, the Goetia becomes a catalog of the human shadow. You know, the psychologist Carl Jung had a great way of putting it. He suggested that the parts of ourselves that we ignore or try to repress, they don't just go away, they come back to haunt us. So naming these impulses, just like Solomon named the 72 spirits, is the very first step to mastering them. So from this perspective, Solomon's greatest achievement wasn't chaining demons in a brass vessel. It was about achieving this profound self-awareness. He wasn't the warden of some infernal prison. He was the master of his own internal empire. And what's really wild is that this story isn't some isolated myth. It's actually one chapter in a long, cross-cultural human tradition of trying to give structure to the unknown, to literally draw a map of the darkness. I mean, this lineage of fear goes back for millennia. The ancient Sumerian Apkallu were rebellious sages bound beneath the earth. The Greek daimons started as neutral go-betweens before they became what we think of as demons. And of course, Islamic lore speaks of the jinn, those beings of smokeless fire with free will. The Goetia didn't invent this stuff, it inherited it, and basically wrote the rulebook. So, why do we do this? Why this universal need to organize chaos? Well, maybe it's because the idea of random, ungoverned evil is just too terrifying for us to comprehend. But giving it names and ranks and rules, we make it understandable. We build a little cage of logic around it. And that brings us right back to the central idea, doesn't it? That this whole incredible legend, with all its sigils, its kings, its brass vessels, it might just be an elaborate metaphor for the human condition. Because the real battle isn't with some host from hell. It's with the shadows that are inside all of us. And so, the story of Solomon and his 72 spirits, it leaves us with this final, chilling question. Solomon's temple might be dust, his ring just a legend, but the forces he gave names to still walk beneath the skin of the world. And when the silence gets deep enough, you really have to wonder, what whispers are you hearing?